Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, it's the post-game pod from the Wolves win over the Raptors in their home opener on Saturday. The Wolves jumped out to a 20-plus point lead, but had to hold on late. The best player in the game for the Wolves was Rudy Gobert. I'll explain why next. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Happy Monday, everybody. Hopefully you had a fantastic weekend. Today's basically the post-game pod from Saturday's home opener over the Raptors. Wolves don't play tonight, which means tomorrow we can preview the big Tuesday night matchup for the Wolves and then get on to talk about, I think Dallas is the Tuesday game and Denver's Friday, both national TV games. So we will dig in on that tomorrow, talk about kind of like key takeaways from the overall first three games. But today I mostly want to focus on the Raptor game since we didn't have a podcast over the weekend. So that's what we'll do today. Big thank you here off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And also, brand new, our newsletter, introducing the Locked On Wolves daily newsletter. One stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. You can sign up for free right now at LockedOnDaily.com. Again, LockedOnDaily.com. You can start your day with the all-new free Locked On Wolves newsletter. Those go out in the morning. Hits the high points from the podcast, so you can read it in text format if you're not able to listen to the show. And also, there's some great national articles that get included in those emails too. So sign up at LockedOnDaily.com. All right, let's go ahead and dive into Wolves Raptors on Saturday. And I'll give kind of like an overall like main takeaway from the game, and then I'll get into a few other takeaways. We'll do studs and duds here later. Overall, I actually thought this was, I know that the way the game ended was a bit of a, I don't say sour taste. It was a little bit of a downer, given that the Wolves led by as many as 22 and had kind of a couple different times built that lead up. And it was just kind of like just hanging on at the finish. The Raptors got it down to 8 in the final few minutes. It was a wire-to-wire win. The Wolves never trailed in this game, which is great. And it's part of the reason why I say I think it's a low bar to clear because they played 3 games. They lost 1 and, barely won against the Kings. And this was the game they won by the most. But it was overall the best all-around performance for the Wolves so far this season. If you just like take a macro look at it, they played an awesome first quarter. And, the Wolves were up 32-18 at the end of the first quarter. So they're up 14 at the end of the first quarter. They were dominant on both ends of the floor. A couple bad turnovers, but that's kind of par for the course for this team, and everything else was good. So great first quarter, a poor second quarter, but still up 10 at half, or actually up 12 at halftime. The second quarter was probably their worst overall quarter. Most of the third quarter was great. They built that lead all the way back north of 20. And then the first half of the fourth quarter was great too. And then it was just kind of like this sloppy finish, bad shot selection, and lackadaisical perimeter defense. The Wolves thought that this Raptors team, which, like, let's be honest here, this is a shorthanded Raptors team that isn't they're not supposed to be that good to begin with, right? They're shorthanded. They were on the second night of a back-to-back on the road, and this shouldn't have been that close of a game. And ultimately, the Wolves did win by 11, but again, I don't want to take anything away from it, but I mean, we got to call it like it is, right? Like, this wasn't a wire-to-wire. Well, it was a wire-to-wire win. There were chunks of this game that were not good. The second quarter, a bit of the close of the third quarter, and then the first part or the second part of the fourth quarter. But then the final couple minutes, it was a pretty close strong. Like, Ant had a pretty strong close. I don't know why I mixed those words up. Not a close strong, a strong close from the Wolves. Anthony Edwards had a really poor middle of the fourth quarter and was a big reason, frankly, why the Raptors got back in this game and made it a 3-possession game in the final couple minutes. But then Ant hit that big 3 in the corner off a pass from Randle, and then he gets the breakaway dunk on the pass from Randle to the 3 really is what put the game away. I think it pushed the lead from 8 to 11 at the time. with just a couple of minutes to play. So overall, though, the best all-around game from the Wolves. They had maybe their best highs of the season so far, and there were very few like bad lows other than a couple of those minutes middle fourth quarter. And the second quarter was sloppy, but overall, I would call this their best game to this point. Overall, other key takeaways. The early portion of this game was all about Anthony Edwards doing Anthony Edwards things. And then he kind of was quiet for the middle portion of the game. And other guys did stuff. And we'll get into some of Julius Randle's performance and some of the role players and three-point shooting. And Jaden had some good minutes. Joe Ingles only played 6 minutes, but had some good stuff too. But early on, Ant was fantastic. And it's easy to forget it because the close was so anticlimactic from Anthony Edwards. But I thought he was making really smart passes. He had a lob to Rudy, which was great to see. Like, if we can get, one of those a game, I'm feeling good about the Ant Rudy chemistry, right? We saw that come on a little bit last year, but there wasn't nearly enough of the Ant to Rudy chemistry. We saw that early in this game. That was great. I thought that his aggressiveness was the right amount. Like the 3-point shots he was taking were good shots. Going to the basket was fine. All of his all of his passing early in the game for Edwards was really, really good. And it's kind of, we've seen that a couple times now, right? I think it was the Sacramento game where like half the game was like, oh, this is perfect Ant. And the other half was like, this is a bad version of Ant. This is the worst case for Ant. And this was the same. Like basically first quarter was great. Middle of the game was kind of so-so. And then the end was disappointing until the final couple of minutes. He ended up with 24 points on 21 shots, 5 of 12 from 3, which means he was just 4 of 9 on 2-point shots. Only got to the line 3 times. And he was only 1 of 3 at the line. He had 4 assists, but he also had 4 turnovers. He had the lowest plus minus of any of the Wolves starters. And his best minutes, again, were early in this game. I want to save Rudy for the whole next segment because that's really what I want to spend the most time on today, because Rudy Gobert, I thought, was the best player on the floor. Actually, you know what? Let's start talking about Rudy now, because that's my key to this game was Rudy Gobert. And if you just kind of like glance at the box score, you'd say, okay, the Raptors were a +5 on the glass. They had 3 more offensive rebounds than Minnesota. And they had 8 more points in the paint. So at first glance, if you didn't watch the game or you were, in and out on the game, you may assume that the Raptors controlled the paint. They won the rebounds, they won points in the paint. But that's not true. Rudy Gobert, for the vast majority of this game, absolutely dominated the paint. When there was a stretch when Jakob Poeltl was off the floor early fourth quarter and the Raptors were playing far smaller than they should have been at any point in this game, because like many teams, they don't really have a true backup center that can at least hold a candle to Gobert in terms of size. Like Chris Boucher's a pretty good player. He's undersized, right? Same with Bruno Fernando. He's too small. And neither one of those guys played heavy minutes. But when Poeltl was off the floor in the fourth quarter, Gobert absolutely controlled the entire game, not just the paint, but the game. Guys were like, we saw a high level of nevermind, certainly more than we saw against Sacramento and LA. If you're not familiar, that's when a guy thinks he's going to score at the rim and sees Gobert and it's like, nah, I'm going to pull the ball back out. I'm going to, try and drop it off to somebody else, let them get stuffed. There was one play, I think it was during that stretch, where Gobert got a block and then got another block, like blocked it off the glass. Ball came back to the Raptors. He got another block. There was another play in the first half. I think it might've been first quarter, where he walled up, and I don't remember who it was on the Raptors. It might've been Davion Mitchell. I can't remember who it was. They went up to shoot it and shot the ball straight up in the air. Gobert walled up and never touched it, and the player caught it, and it was a travel. And that, doesn't go in the box score. The traditional box score is a block for Rudy Gobert, but it effectively was, or it was, a block where the Wolves controlled possession. Essentially was the impact of that. I want to talk a little bit more about what I mean by him controlling the paint, give a couple more examples of that. And then we'll dig into Julius Randle's game, because I thought offensively Julius was awesome. The perimeter defense for the Wolves, I'm going to blame a lot of the paint scoring for the Raptors on that. So we'll talk about that a little bit too. But we'll talk about all that here next, and then we'll finish with individual studs and duds. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, New customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Again, that's FanDuel.com. Now's the best time of the year to head over there. Of course, we not only do we have football, and like there was tons of football Sunday. I know the Vikings lost last Thursday, but there's Monday Night Football tonight, which is super fun to live bet. You got the World Series Game 3 tonight, Yankees-Dodgers. Of course, you've got hockey. The Wild are off to a great start to the season. And, of course, the start of NBA basketball. The Wolves don't play tonight, but they play tomorrow on national TV once again. So all four major sports in the U.S. are playing right now. It's the best time of year to get over at FanDuel. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right. So we talked a little bit about Rudy Gobert. Let's put a bow on the Gobert performance here. Talked about the wall up in the first half. Talked about the never minds. Talked about the play where he had multiple blocks. And then he controlled the glass late in the game. And really for the game overall, he had 12 boards himself. Nobody on the Raptors had more than 8. And nobody on the Raptors had more than 10. Pirtle had 10. Scotty Barnes also had 8 coming from the perimeter. But as I said earlier, when Pirtle was off the floor, Gobert utterly dominated. And when Pirtle was on the floor, Gobert far outplayed him, as he should, right? Pirtle ended up with 8 points, 10 rebounds, only 1 block, shot just 4 of 9. So 8 points, then 9 shots, no free throw attempts. Gobert had 15 points on 8 shots, was 3 of 4 at the line, had 12 boards, and 4 blocks for Gobert. He only had 1 turnover in this game, and it was a moving screen. He gets at least one of those a game. It's fine because if he sets 12 great screens in a game, and a lot of them are iffy, kind of borderline, he's going to get called for 1 a game. But the rest of them are such, he's such a good screener. We could talk about screen assists. I know, our friend in Boston, Locked On Jazz host David Locke, talk about this all the time when Rudy was on the Utah Jazz, that he led the league in screen assists, and I'm sure those numbers are very similar in a Wolves uniform too. His screen setting is so good that you can handle 1 or even 2 of those turnovers a game, because on so many of these other screens he's setting, it's leading directly to points. And, moving screen, it's not great. Turnovers are never good, but you'd rather have a dead ball turnover than a live ball turnover. And it doesn't always lead directly to points. The point is, Gobert controlled this game. 12 rebounds, and 3 of them were late in the game as the Raptors were trying to come back. He was trying to shut down second chance opportunities for the Raptors. He had 2 offensive rebounds, both early in the game. There was one where he got the ball, was far underneath the glass. And I feel like at times last year, he would have tried to take one dribble and kind of power up and shoot it up and underneath the edge of the backboard. But he didn't. He swung it out to the perimeter. The Wolves had 3 passes, and it led to an Nickeil Alexander-Walker 3-pointer. Really, really strong game from Rudy Gobert. And this was a perfect example of a game where he controlled it. And it's one that, it was on a Saturday night, not on national TV, against the Raptors, shorthanded Raptors team that's not very good. Nothing else really notable about this game on the national stage, and people aren't going to notice it. But it matters just as much as any other game of 82. And this was a game that Rudy Gobert had his stamp on from start to finish, and he was the reason they closed this thing out the way that they did. Also, he only had 1 assist. It was a great assist. It was a shovel that just shoveled the ball to Randle, cutting to the basket. It led to a dunk. He scored on, 6 of his 8 buckets, he shot 6 for 8 from the field. And of those 6 buckets, I think 3 were lobs, if not 4. 1 from Ant, 1 from Conley. I think there was 1 from Ingles mixed in there, and 1 from Randle. Just a really well-rounded performance. And he played 39 minutes. Finch is still riding these guys. He's making them play heavy minutes right now. And Gobert was great. Let's talk a little bit overall about Julius Randle's performance and the Wolves offense in general. There were moments where it was stagnant, and a lot of that was late third quarter, mid to late fourth quarter, when the Wolves offense struggled. It was a bit stagnant, and there were moments where it was just a lot of Ant dribbling, trying to turn around. One of them led to a bucket on the other end, and an immediate Chris Finch timeout in kind of mid stages, late, I don't know, the 5-6 minute mark of the fourth quarter, as things were starting to slip a bit for the Wolves. And Finch called the timeout. That was that, that those are the same issues this team has, going back to last year, is occasionally the ball gets sticky and there just isn't enough movement. They did have some actual, like they ran some plays to get Julius Randle isolation on the right side of the, well, actually on both sides of the floor. He prefers operating from the left side, but there was a couple times late where they were just like, all right, our best play here, we've got the lead, right? We don't like our best bet to score a bucket right now, especially with Ant having a couple rough possessions, like Grady Dick and others did a good job defending him. Davion Mitchell, and contributed to his struggles too. Like a couple of those Ant turnovers late in the game. I mean, he finished with what, 4, I believe. Yeah, 4 turnovers for Ant. A couple were just bad, like ball pressure on Ant, got the ball knocked away from him. More so that than like terrible passes, although there were a couple of those. So credit the Raptors for that. But the Wolves just said, look, our best bet is if we give Randle the ball in ISO and tell him to go to work because we have the lead so he can pound the ball away, back somebody down, use up most of the shot clock and shoot one of his patented like 10-foot, power up and through somebody, try and get a foul call. Maybe you get it. Maybe you don't. Maybe you make the bucket. Maybe you don't. But you're going to get the ball up on the rim. You're not going to turn it over. You're going to get an offensive rebound if you miss it, or you give yourself a shot at an offensive rebound. And there's an equal chance almost that you get to the free throw line. Randle did shoot 7 free throws in this game. So, and something I've talked about, I think, after all 3 games is Randle's ability to punish mismatches. And he did that again in this game, especially early when he got some mismatches and Randle just backed guys down and scored. To this point, other than moments in that Lakers game on opening night, I haven't seen extreme spacing concerns with Randle and Ant on the floor together. It's something that's going to come up from time and again. I shouldn't say time and again. From time to time is a better way to say that. But that still happened anyway with Towns and Gobert and Ant on the floor together. Even though Towns could space the floor, sometimes they got a little bit crowded. The spacing wasn't good. And we haven't seen that quite as much. For the most part, Randle and Ant have stayed out of each other's way and both been impactful offensively. They've also both had moments like I can only think of maybe 2 possessions in this game where Randle just like ignored everybody and decided to go to work and it didn't work out. But for the most part, over 3 games, massively small sample size, of course, against 3 very different opponents, Randle's been really good at picking his spots. Randle's done a good job overall at being relatively efficient, picking his spots correctly, and scoring when he gets the chance. Another note here on the rotation. Similar, basically the same rotation we saw the last couple games, and no surprise there. Naz didn't play nearly as much in the second half. He looked like he got banged up a little bit toward the end of the first half, but he wasn't as. And part of it was Rudy was playing so well, and there was nobody in foul trouble. So Naz only played 21 minutes. DiVincenzo played 23. We'll talk more about him in a minute. I'm not going to give DiVincenzo a dud in this game, but I want to talk about his performance here in a moment. Joe Ingles, again, only saw first half minutes. This time, I think it was 2 different short stints. I think it was like late first quarter and then again mid-second quarter. And it was good. He had 4 assists in 6 minutes and no turnovers. He did commit 3 fouls. The feet don't move like they used to defensively for Joe Ingles, but in 6 minutes to get 4 assists, an offensive rebound, and no turnovers, that's pretty impactful. And that's kind of the Joe Ingles role. I said all along I thought he'd be the 9th man. And then after they traded for DiVincenzo, I wasn't sure who that 9th man would be. If it would sometimes be Ingles, sometimes be Minot, sometimes be Dillingham or Shannon. In every game now, it's been Joe Ingles. And he's delivered. And they didn't go back to him in the second half at all. And that's fine. Like, it's just use him to spell guys and use him to kind of slow things down. And he was a big part, by the way, of that late first quarter positive play for Minnesota that helped push them to a 14-point lead at the end of the first frame. His second quarter stint wasn't quite as fruitful. He ended up just a +1 in 6 minutes. But overall, I think the way that Chris Finch is operating with his rotation and utilizing Ingles and picking his spots for some of these guys, like Mike Conley only played 26 minutes in this game, and he missed some shots and stuff, but he was good. 10 and 6, 4 steals, a +17 for Conley. And he's the one, like that's the DiVincenzo role, right? Like, he's going to be in the game to spell Mike Conley. They're rarely playing too many minutes together. And in this game, Conley played 26 minutes. DiVincenzo played 23 off the bench. Nickeil Alexander-Walker only played 16. So interesting to kind of watch the ebb and flow of these guys' minutes and who's on the floor with whom here as we move forward through the early stages of the season. All right. Let's talk individual studs and duds next, and then we'll peek ahead to what to expect here this week, schedule wise, for the Wolves. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Gametime. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. No matter what you want to see live, there's plenty of stuff out there. Sports, of course, comedy, concerts, theater, all of the above. I love attending. I just went to a comedy show a couple weeks ago. Go to concerts, I don't know, handful of times a year, sports whenever I can. And same with theater, especially if I'm traveling. My wife and I are traveling. We'll go see a show. We were in Broadway in New York earlier this year, went to Broadway. Gametime is the best place to find tickets for all of the above. They can also curate their Gametime picks to make it easier to find what you like most and save on those events. You can also toggle on the all-in pricing feature that will show you the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. And you can get a panoramic view from your seat with their seat views in the app before you buy. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime Picks. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDON NBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. All right, let's talk individual studs and duds. So I already spent a little bit more time than usual talking about individual players within the scheme that the Wolves had in this game. So I won't spend quite as long on a couple of these guys. I thought, and I said this already, I thought Rudy Gobert was the best player on the floor, period, in this game for the Wolves, like for either team, period. 15 points, 12 rebounds, 6 of 8 shooting for Rudy, 4 blocks, 1 assist, 1 steal, only 1 turnover, and was a game high plus 20. I will often give this disclaimer that I don't think individual player, single game plus minus is the best measure of really anything usually, but it can tell a story. And in this game, I thought it backed up what the eye test tells us, is that Rudy was the best player on the floor. He was really, really good, controlled the paint for all the reasons we said earlier in the show. Julius Randle was the next best player on the floor, period, in this game. 24 points on 9 of 16 shooting, super efficient for Julius Randle, 1 of 3 on threes. So he was 8 of 12 on 2-point shots, 5 of 7 at the line. Getting to the line 7 times is great. I talked about this after the trade. The number one benefit for Randle over Cat, if you're going to make the case for the fit, is getting to the free throw line. Cat did not get to the line enough for how talented he was, and we can look at what he's doing with the Knicks, and it's too early to talk about the big market whistle, I think, but we can have some fun with that right now, I think, until if it becomes real, then we can be angrier about it. But Julius Randle, clearly for Julius Randle, he's still getting the whistle he was getting with the Knicks through, again, 3 games. But 5 of 7 at the free throw line. And for his career, Randle's been really good at getting to the line, and he's done that so far in Minnesota. He also had 9 rebounds, 5 assists. He did have 4 turnovers in this game, but we've talked about, turnover rate's going to be something that ebbs and flows for him because he does take a few more chances with the ball. He's not despite the fact he plays more physical than Karl-Anthony Towns, he's not going to get called for anywhere near the same level of offensive fouls or frequency of offensive fouls, I should say, as Karl-Anthony Towns does or did in a Minnesota uniform at least. But a well-rounded game for Julius Randle in his target center debut in a Wolves uniform. 24, 9, and 5, an efficient 9 of 16 shooting. And if he wants to take 4 threes a game, that feels right. Some nights he'll make 1, some nights he'll make 2. He'll probably end up shooting 34, 35% from 3. That's fine. That's a good performance for him. My third stud, I guess I'll go with Ant. Overall, it was an okay game, and he was so good in the first quarter, and obviously building that initial 14-point lead, that's what got the Wolves, ahead of the chains, if you want to use a football term that kind of loosely fits here. Like, if you build a lead, then the other team's got to spend the rest of the game coming back. The Wolves never looked back in the sense that they never trailed, and it was mostly a double-digit lead. It got a little dicier than it should have at the end, but a big part of building that big lead was how good Ant was in the first quarter. And again, he did seal the game with that made three in the corner, which was off the Randle pass. And then the nice dunk in the open floor that like really sealed the game. But the line's fine, like 24 points, on 21 shots. It's not super efficient, but 5 of 12 on threes. We'll take that. 6 boards, 4 assists. He did have the 4 turnovers, but outside of like get to the line a little bit more, I guess. But in general, it was a fine Anthony Edwards game. I meant to get back to perimeter defense earlier, and I failed to do so. So real quick, I'm going to inject this now. Perimeter defense I thought was spotty in this game. We're talking about a short-handed Raptors team that like Scotty Barnes is really the only true threat off the dribble, and all of a sudden like Grady Dick's got a career high 25 points and 16 shots, and Ochai Agbaji ends up with 19 points and 12 shots, and is like 5 of 7 on 2-point attempts. I thought the perimeter defense was, we'll call it spotty. And that's part of the reason that there were so many points in the paint. I mean, the Raptors did have 12 offensive rebounds, but it's not like that was the reason they had so many points in the paint. Like you look at their overall, points. Second chance points. I lost it. I thought I had second chance points here, but I think the bigger issue was the volume of shots they got in the paint, in part because of the penetration they got off the Wolves' perimeter defense. Julius Randle had a couple rough moments on the perimeter, and he wasn't the only one. So I thought that was a little bit concerning, but it's a long season. They get 2 nights off. Hopefully they get back at it Tuesday with some better perimeter defense so that there's not so much pressure put on the paint and at the rim on Rudy Gobert. But that to me was the biggest issue defensively for Minnesota. Duds, I don't really have any. Like Nikhil was quiet. He was good when he was on the floor. 4 points, 4 assists in 16 minutes. We talked about Ingles. DiVincenzo, 16 points on 15 shots is not the efficiency you want out of him. He was just 1 of 4 on twos. Like I don't mind the 4 of 11 on threes because the dude was 3rd in the league in 3-point makes last year and 3rd in attempts. He shot north of 40%. Just let it fly, Dante, right? Like almost all those shots were good. The 1 of 4 on twos was not great, and a couple of those were forced. If he doesn't take those, or if those become threes, now we're talking about 19 points on 14 shots. So that looks a lot better than 16 on 15, right? So it's really just that kind of that line that you gotta kind of toe that line of what's the right volume of 3-point attempts versus makes versus these tough twos I'm taking. And, it was fine. He's not a dud. He was fine. It was his probably worst game of the 3 in a Wolves uniform, even though he had 16 points. It was just a bit more of a high volume performance. Nas was quiet. I mentioned him earlier. We talked about Conley. Oh, McDaniels was decent. I thought this was his best game of the season overall, despite a couple lapses on the perimeter. He had a couple of really tough buckets in the second half. I think it was third quarter when the Wolves were initially building their lead back north of 20. He had a couple of tough buckets and looked really comfortable offensively. And that was kind of the theme in the first 2 games. We talked about the foul trouble in game 1. We talked about some bad decisions late and bad defense late against the Kings. But there were, in all 3 games, we've seen moments of Jaden McDaniels looking decisive, aggressive, and appropriately aggressive offensively. And that to me is a really positive sign. He made his only 3-point attempt, and that was like a straight on about top of the circle, like well above the break 3. He only had 9 points, but this was I thought his best all-around game of the season. And I think he's showing a little bit of growth offensively, and that's definitely a positive thing to see. All right. Last thing here, the schedule, and we'll probably dig into this a bit more on Tuesday's show as we talk about overall takeaways for the first 3 games and get you ready for Wolves Mavs. But Wolves Mavs Tuesday night, it's the early TNT game, so 6:30 p.m. tip against the Mavericks on TNT. Wolves Denver on Friday, so they get Sunday and Monday off before Dallas. So 2 days off, they get Dallas. Then 2 more days off before they get Denver on Friday night, both games at home. So it was really good to get this Raptors win because now you get Mavs and Denver. Denver is the 8:30 p.m. Central tip on ESPN on Friday night. And that's followed. It's the first night of a home road back-to-back in San Antonio Saturday night. So we'll see if at some point between the Denver and San Antonio game, we see our first glimpse of Josh Minott or maybe Dillingham or maybe Shannon in a regular season game if the Wolves try and save some legs for Mike Conley or less likely DiVincenzo, but one of those guys. I think that's a possibility here as we get later in the week. All right. That's all we got for you today on the show. Of course, on Tuesday, we'll preview Wolves Mavs. We'll dig into the biggest takeaways from the first 3 games. We'll talk rotation. We'll talk offense. We'll talk shot distribution. Some of the early, first week of the season's super small sample size theater type stuff that we'll get into on Tuesday. Big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV, and you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. A reminder of the new newsletter introducing the Locked On Wolves daily newsletter. It's the one-stop shop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free at LockedOnDaily.com. Again, that's LockedOnDaily.com. Start your day with the all-new free Locked On Wolves newsletter. Again, the Locked On Wolves podcast is, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.